Martin from Belief. The date today is Wednesday, the 27th of May, 10:52 a.m. This ad was recorded on the 25th of May at 9:35 p.m. It's indicative of everything they run, which is the poster child, I guess, for non-compliance. Now, Compare One are a non-existent brand for Bizleads, who sell leads primarily. They've ventured into the space where they have a branded solution recently. They are blatantly non-compliant. Everything they do is grossly non-compliant. This ad will kind of illustrate that. I'll refer to as much legislation as I can. I'm recording this. This will be one of the ads that will support an article on our website about the common mistakes people make. Now, look, if you're buying leads, you shouldn't be. If you're buying leads, you need to contact me, and I'll put you through a webinar program. You'll come out the other end, and you will get better results than anybody in the industry. You're introducing an experience that exceeds that of every single digital agency in the industry when it comes to financial marketing, advertising. Been doing it for over 2 decades. And unfortunately, non-compliance is ubiquitous, and it's a real problem. It is a genuine problem. ASIC don't have the resources to enforce this stuff. Aggregation groups seemingly don't care, so I tend to call it out when I see it. All right. Now, first of all, most Aussie homeowners don't realise they're overpaying thousands a year on their mortgage. Rates now start from just 4.99% per annum, 5.54%. Comparison. Does that rate exist? No. We have access to 40 plus lenders. Now, this rate should have been changed. With access to 40 plus lenders and hundreds of loans, you could find a better rate and options, lower your monthly repayments, get quick hassle-free approval. Now, when lead generation companies enter in the financial space, they are governed by the same regulations, the same enforcement action. So the NCCP, that's the National Consumer Credit Protection Act 2009, the Australian Consumer Law, ACL, that's Section 10, generally governs everybody in relation to a whole bunch of different issues. And the National Consumer Credit Protection Regulations 2010, Schedule 3 is most prominent. Let's go through some of this. Now, we'll start with the rate. 5.54%. And you tell me, I'm not going to make the determination, but you tell me if they're offering advice or in any way suggesting that an individual is eligible. In fact, I will tell you what I think. Of course, I'm going to tell you what I think, but let's start with this, okay? The NCCP, that's 2009. The key areas of that act, as you're well aware: consumer credit advertising, mortgage advertising, comparison rate obligations, misleading credit representations. All right, and the regulations deal with the comparison rate, the prominence, the wording, the assumptions, display requirements, all that sort of stuff. So comparison rate requirement, the legislative source for that is NCP Regs Schedule 3. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. And it requires a comparison rate displayed when an interest rate is advertised for regulated consumer credit. Now, we have got an article on our website where we have maybe 200 examples of where that hasn't taken place. The reality is it's far more than that. It's thousands of examples, but they're just 200 because they happen to be screenshotted by me, and that's that. But there are thousands of examples. I've got maybe 30 examples of Bizleads publishing a rate without a comparison rate. They've done that because of these critiques. The guy that runs the gig knows exactly who I am, and he knows I have critique this stuff. And I've heard that from a couple of people who told me he doesn't like me very much, but he's breaking the law. He's a criminal. Like, what he's doing is criminal. He's introducing an experience to brokers, which is criminal. So, the core requirements: if an interest rate is advertised, the trigger there is for comparison rate obligations. Again, you know that. Well, most people know that and ignore it. If you know it and ignore it, it's even worse than displaying the interest rate without the comparison rate, because you're ignorant. Because if you admit it, that's used as rate bait, and that's terrible. It's misleading, and it breaks the law. So, requirement for displayed rates, let's talk about that. Genuine, available, not misleading, not create a false impression, or attainability. Attainability relates to really low rate, 60% stuff, green loans, even interest-only stuff with, first-home buyer products and everything. You have to make it a reasonable rate that is broadly available by consumer groups, and not omit material qualifications that distort the overall impression. That's really important because the disclaimer is required on each ad. Every ad we've ever printed has a disclaimer down the bottom. If it's a square format, it has it visible above the 20% font, so it's visible. If it's a real format, so 916, it has it down the bottom again. It's about 25% above the screen, so it's not obfuscated by the Facebook nonsense where it shows the page and all that sort of stuff. It has to be somewhere where it's seen. So the comparison rate, must be displayed, in sufficient prominence. That's beside the interest rate with, or below, by the way, in the same font, a near color, not be hidden in fine print. It has to include the prescribed wording, it can't be visually obscured, all that sort of stuff applies. And then the comparison warning, whenever an interest rate is shown, the comparison warning must be shown. And the wording there is shown in the reg. So the comparison rate, again, not less prominent than the headline rate, must be readable, not be blurred below the fold, hidden in expandable disclosures, visible in mobile renderings and such, and that's all enforced, by the way. ASIC Regulatory Guide 234 is really good for that purpose. It's like the dummy's guide to financial advertising, and I say that in an endearing way. I think it's a really good guide for people to get a general understanding, but you have to visit the regulations themselves because RG 234 is like if you were teaching someone the alphabet, RG 234 is giving them the letter A for Apple. It's really basic stuff. You have to go in deep and have a look. Now, the misleading rate advertising prohibitions, they're governed by, the two financial pieces of the NCCP Act and Regs, and also Australian consumer law. That's primarily the Competition and Consumer Act 2010, Schedule 2, Schedule 18, Schedule 29, broadly within Schedule 10, right? So it prohibits misleading or deceptive conduct, and Section 29 prohibits false or misleading representations about price or services. That's really bread and butter stuff. That's basic consumer law. That's not financial legislation, although it repeats itself both within the NCCP regs and the Act. False or misleading representation about price or services. And in the consumer market, your interest rate is the price. It's the price of interest. So the ASIC Act 2001, stretching my memory here, Section 12DA, misleading or deceptive conduct in financial services, and Section 12DB talks about the false or misleading representation concerning financial services. So again, that's ASIC Act 2001. Read it if you haven't already. Now, the reason I'm talking about all of this is the rate must be valid. Now, there's no real single provision saying that how long it should be before you change it. Now, this is months out of date, and it needs to be changed. So I guess the aggregate effect or the combined effect of ACL Section 18, ASIC Act Section 12DA, and NCCP advertising provisions requires that, and this is something you have to know from memory. Any good marketing guy will know this specific sentence from memory. Advertising rates must not be false, outdated, unattainable, or misleading at the time consumers view them, which means if they no longer exist, if they're no longer offered, or if they're materially inaccurate and you continue to display them, they constitute misleading conduct. Now, there are certain leeways that are applied. Now, generally, ASIC will turn a blind eye to the time it takes, say, on your website. They give you 7 to 10 days and that kind of thing. 7 days is kind of the absolute limit. The representation must not be misleading at the time it's viewed, and that repeats itself over and over in all the pieces of legislation. What does that mean? So once the rate becomes inaccurate or unavailable, continued publication becomes increasingly risky from a legal perspective. Now, the contravention risk arises immediately upon the representation becomes misleading, so as soon as somebody sees it. Good. Now, I guess the practical regulatory expectation, expect prompt correction and removal of that ad or the rate once you're aware of it. And you have to actively monitor and so on. That's what the regulators expect. Now, in reality, they do allow leeway, and I've spoken to them about this a number of times. So that when you make reasonable efforts to change something, they don't get angry. When there's an error that's sent to you from, if you're publishing feeds to your site, as we do, if a lender publishes an incorrect feed and that feed becomes available, that rate becomes available on your website, then ASIC will turn a blind eye, because that's the information that you reasonably believe was actually available because it's published via the source. Delaying the risk, though, so when a lender changes rates where they remain valid. And we changed, by the way, we used to cache for up to 36 hours rates on our websites, and we changed that to 6 hours because the rate that is most valid, we want that to become available as quickly as possible. So if you use it on a ad, especially, that's the purpose of this video, this critique or the review, whatever you want to call it, is it needs to be changed immediately, right? And our policy on ads is if a rate changes, the ad comes down immediately, right? The RBA announces something at 206, it comes down at 207, right? At that point, we don't want to continue publishing something we know is not going to be reasonably available to anybody. So that ad gets unpublished. Now, consumers, if you leave it up there, they're going to get outdated pricing impressions, and it may constitute in some cases, in certainly cases like this, like definitely cases like this, where it's misleading conduct. Again, I should talk about ASIC, the regulatory guide, RG 234. Easy to remember, 234 consecutive numbers. It states advertising must be, and I think there are 3 points. What were they? Present balanced information, avoid misleading impressions, and ensure qualifications are sufficiently prominent. So that's the comparison warning and so on, which I very rarely see on sites. And as a rule, just publish it on every page. And then if it's on landing pages that provide a specific rate, have the comparison rate altered for that specific rate. The 7 to 10 days that we've historically been told will apply for an update, that is true from the enforcement point of view. That is like police won't usually give you a ticket for jaywalking in the same way that ASIC won't enforce the legislation on the basis of a short delay. But again, read National Credit Code, that's Schedule 1, and NCCP Regs 2010. That's a good starting point just for understanding your obligations there. So this is well and truly out of date. It should have been changed, and it is against the law. Now, to be clear, I need to state this again because I see a lot of brokers fall victim to it, where they just let an ad run because it's got a lot of engagement, got a lot of likes, got a lot of this, got a lot of that. And this has 45 likes, 1 share, and 6 saves, which is significant given that a large portion of that information, or those consumer engagement signals, were probably as a result of this low rate. And I'm hoping one of those saves was somebody from ASIC who's going to scrutinise the ad, because this is just blatantly illegal. You're lying to people. So ACL 6, Section 18 and ASIC Act Section 12DA once again talks about misleading or deceptive conduct. What does that mean? It means if a rate is no longer accurate and a consumer sees it, the conduct may already be misleading at that moment. There's no safe period really, and that's why we pull ads down straight away. So, okay, I don't want to talk about that anymore. So what we might do is have a look at the ad itself. Just before I continue, actually, with hitting the play button there, the comparison rate is required on this page. Comparison, by the way, has to be spelt comparison, unless it's in a widget, in which case a tooltip is acceptable. There are a whole bunch of little rules there, but once the comparison rate is shown, comparison rate warning is also required. So let's have a look at this ad. So I'll just play it through front to back. Very similar to my local broker. I'm going to turn this sound down. We don't want that music playing. The BS form, by the way, this is truncated down the bottom. Like the form is not shown properly. What rate do you have? Oh, okay. Again, this is screen recording to screen recording. I do this and just have a look at the page sometimes. Nothing in the disclaimer, by the way, absolves you from the sins made elsewhere on the page. You can't say something or do something and then down the bottom in fine print say, oh, we actually meant this. So that'll be discussed in our article. 2%. variable 2%. How much do I have on my mortgage? $2.5 million. But the value of the property is $550,000. Clearly, that qualifies for nothing. Here, I just go through and click anything because it's not important at this point. I've given a rate that can't be beat. And I don't even know why a property address is required half the time. It does negate. Great news. I'm going to stop it there. Great news. You're eligible to refinance your mortgage. Now, in the article that this video will accompany, I talk a lot about the words eligibility, qualifications, or qualified. I talk about the word quiz and survey and all those sorts of things. So here we go. What does the ad imply? What's implied? What's a reasonable consumer going to believe will happen on the basis of this? How's the funnel designed psychologically? How's this top of subscription funnel designed? And whether the results materially influence behavior. You'll hear that over and over again in legal talk. How does it materially influence behavior on the basis of, hey, you're eligible to refinance your mortgage on the basis of that, get lower rates and all that sort of stuff. Keeping in mind, these people think I'm going to get 4.99%. They assume on the basis of this, I'm eligible for this 4.99% on the basis of those bogus, values I stuck in the beginning. So if the user is asked for the mortgage balance, the interest rate, property value, address, repayment amount, income, lender details, loan term, if not an address, then the postcode, or the UX, or the user experience, subtly implies that calculating something, that results being generated, or something's going to happen, results are going to appear, or you're receiving an analysis, but in reality, nothing is repeated, or a fake message is returned. That is implied representation. That's legally actionable. So Australian law, by the way, does not only prohibit explicit falsehoods, it also prohibits implied misrepresentations, misleading conduct by omission, deceptive overall impression, misleading interface design. And from a funnel, from a UX perspective, that includes progress bars, loading animations, stupid, shitty, floating streamer things on the screen, calculating savings screens, pseudo assessment flows, and checking lender eligibility. Just for a start, by the way, there's so much to it. Why does this matter? So, look, regulators understand, right? Commitment bias, sunk cost effect, reciprocity, authority cues, cognitive momentum, all that sort of stuff. Authorities understand that. The regulators know that. So, they'll prosecute on the basis of what is a dominant message, the net impression, the behavioural takeaway, the implied meaning, not just the literal wording, which again is false here. Great news. So it can be misleading even if every sentence is correct. If I did qualify and they said you qualify, that would still be, it's a dark pattern, right? Deceptive progress indicators, in this case streamers, false interactivity, false calculations, disguise, lead forms, misleading urgency, forced disclosure sequences, all that sort of stuff. And that's where a subscription funnel morphs its way into dark pattern territory. So users believe they're using something that'll give them actual results or qualification. And by the way, ASIC really take notice of this when there's financial vulnerability or consumers under mortgage distress, refinancing urgencies implied, on the basis of rates, limited time, a little bit like someone did that recently, but I'll put it in the article. Savings claims are suggested, in this case very clearly implied. So the potential breaches are significant here. Like, this breaks so many laws, right? Australian consumer law, misleading and deceptive contact, false representation, misleading service advertising. The threshold is broad, right? There's a stack there. Intentional deception is, this is intentional. This guy knows he's lying to people, right? The ASIC Act is really aggressive. It is aggressive where consumers are financially stressed. There's home loans involved, so consumer credit, savings, improvements that claim there via the fake rate, and it's lead generation basically masquerading as analysis. So that form does nothing except capture details. So it's prompting me there to put in a name and last name. And that breaches the Privacy Act. So there's a crossover into the Privacy Act. Although the financial legislation is more strict, if you like. And that impacts, I guess, from the data collection issue. Okay, are they receiving? Is the user receiving a meaningful service? Is there a personalized, valid, and clear result based on true metrics? Was it a real assessment made? And are they making a recommendation? Right? You are eligible. That eligibility word is kind of crazy. Right? So, okay. So if ASIC was to evaluate this, right? Let's look at maybe the top 6 or 7 issues associated with this. What would an ordinary consumer reasonably believe? Again, these are points. There's 6 points we have all our guys basically memorized. What would an ordinary consumer reasonably believe? Was the flow primarily designed for information gathering rather than information serving? Was the calculation substantively genuine? Were users unfairly induced to continue? Was the commercial intent sufficiently clear? And was the emotional takeaway misleading? So, did this ad fail that test? Yes, it grotesquely failed. It's illegal. It breaches a number of pieces of legislation. And it's just horrible. Even this great news, the regulators assess the dominant message or the overall impression, the net impression, if you like, rather than just the words. So it's the impression that a user, that the way it makes them feel, basically. And it comes from a combination of, the primary legislation, statutory I'm not even say the word, court interpretations, ASIC regulatory guidance, ACCC enforcement principles, and long-standing case law. That all points towards this being a shitty, non-compliant ad, and brokers are supporting this by way of buying leads. So they are inherently connected to this experience and partially liable for the mistakes this bonehead is making. Even from an Australian consumer law perspective, that's, the Consumer Competition and Consumer Act 2010, Schedule 2, the key provision, Section 18, misleading or deceptive conduct. A person must not, in trade or commerce, engage in conduct that is misleading or deceptive or is likely to mislead or deceive. Our guys, once again, will remember that. I say that so much that they will just know it. And again, overall impression doctrine, implied representation, dominant message analysis, deceptive UX, dark patterns, misleading advertising, all this sort of stuff applies. But conduct is interpreted by them extremely broadly. Like, it's just a shitty experience. I'm not even going to go on because I've made my point. Right, I've made my point. This is what brokers are doing. Let's continue with this horse shit experience. This is what brokers are supporting. This is the experience that is, and you go, well, the leads weren't great. And of course they weren't great. Nearly done. Through it bar. Last step, provide my phone number. See, here they're asking for information that isn't required on the basis of, this is where it creeps over and intersects with the Privacy Act, because they're asking information now predicated on a false claim. All right, I'm providing this information on a false claim. This is where it goes really dark, really quick. So that's that, guys. This, Bizleads, if I was a lawyer, I would say stick clear of them, right? Don't touch them with a 20-foot pole. As somebody in the industry, I can't say that. As somebody in the industry, I'd say evaluate their experience, ensure that you're delivered with a compliant experience, and ensure you're not supporting a business that intentionally and deliberately deceives consumers and introduces non-compliant experiences to you. Now, this is nothing compared to the offshore stuff. This is like, the greatest ad in the world compared to the stuff that's outsourced to various parts to, let's just call it the Northwest. And Philippines and India. Those people just don't give a crap because they're not accountable to the same legislation. So they make phone calls outside hours, do not call lists, and they lie to you. They give you fake rates, all sorts of stuff. And I exposed a lot of this in the past. One with a particular aggregator now, and it's come back to bite them on the bum. I told them 3 years ago that they were engaging in that practice, and they intentionally ignored me, didn't even respond to the sentences as I was saying them. So I told them something and they talk about something else. They just pretended they did not hear. That was their way of acknowledging that. So this is what the industry is doing, and it shits me. Brokers deserve better. The industry deserves better. Consumers absolutely deserve better. Consumers deserve an honest experience that is completely transparent and one that provides for opportunity. And we're not delivering that. We need to do better. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than the banks when it comes to our marketing and promotion and advertising. We're not doing that. We're failing. That's that. My number, 0400 777 300. Call or text me at any time, and certainly get in touch to do our webinar series. Our webinar series will make you a better marketer than any of these guys that claim to provide a service. That's my guarantee. You will know more and you will get better results out of an experience that will take 20 times less. Our current experience that we've tested, it takes 12 minutes for someone to have an idea and then push out an ad. And still, brokers buy this crap, these crap leads. Anyway, 0400 777 300. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.